Okay, so first of all, my back has been giving me problems ever since Wednesday, either Wednesday or Thursday. Yeah, I was practically bedridden for a couple days there. But as it stands, I'm sore, but I'll probably be moving around a lot. But I tried to do this actually last night. Um, but it just didn't come together. And so that's why I'm doing it now. Um, so I've been going through information concerning the Seattle Newsboy Union, and there will definitely be probably at least two other videos, because there's a lot of information. But um, I wanted to do a video about what I've collected so far. And because these, these are an interesting bunch of kids. I mean, and to be honest, they have opened up because the stuff that I knew, like Mother Jones and Lewis Hine, and then of course over on the East Coast and everything. And everything that I've known about child labor has always been about over there. And then uh, such as Mother Jones and the protesters, putting kids in school and out of factories and that sort of thing. This these kids are just it's like they're not even child labor. Yeah. It's now to start off, one thing to understand about the Pacific Northwest, Seattle and everything, back in the 1880s, 1800s, this was the Wild West. Okay, I mean, people were already coming over here for the gold rush, the San Francisco gold rush and everything, and then they were slowly coming up here and making their home in, other areas in California and Oregon, and of course in Washington. And so, and of course, I already knew that. Living in Washington State, you learn a lot of Washington history, not just learning about the state bird and the state tree and all that stuff. No, in elementary school and middle school, especially, we were learning about the history of the state and around the area. But and it was, you know, I have family in Seattle. So I was going to Seattle my whole life, from a little kid and even living there and everything. So I know the area. I, I know it. But when I was collecting pictures for this, it was just funny to see these roads and see them as dirt, dusty roads. The area really hasn't changed all that much. You see Pike Street, Pine Street, First Street, Fourth Street, and all that. And some of the buildings have changed. Some of the buildings have moved. Yeah, they did move a few buildings, and yeah, there were a couple of mansions that they moved. And of course, some buildings are gone, and it's the way of it. In big cities, that's what happens. And so when it comes to the newsboys, now of course their union formed in 1892, November 24th to be exact. And which, as I was doing research on it, it turned out that there were other newsboy strikes in 1892. The Tacoma boys decided to go on strike, and the Oregonian newsboys went on strike. They went on strike in August, both Tacoma and the Oregonian newsboys. Decided, and of course, same deal. It's because of money. And in fact, I believe it's the Oregonian newsies. They were also, there was like a big dispute about the fact that the Oregonian would not take unsold newspapers. And I don't think that was the problem with Tacoma. I think it was just money. But when it came to the Seattle, they went on strike and formed the union. Now, every union, of course, had their president. This was the same over on the East Coast 7 years later. But it's the same with every union. They have their president, they have their treasurer, they have um, uh, let's see, president, treasurer, and there's one other one, and I'm blanking on it. Let me see. Oh, I didn't put it up. And so it's pretty organized. Um, let's see, where did I put it? It's here. My folder for this scrappy bunch of kids. Okay, let's see. Let's look at the union here. And I believe this is for the Tacoma kids. No, okay. Nope, that's the wrong one. Union officers. So, and do I have a year for this? This is the year after the union was formed. I think it's April 16th, 1893. At the regular quarterly election of the officers of the Seattle Newsboy Union, the following officers were elected. Harrison was president. There was a vice president. There was a treasurer and a secretary. Um, it seems like there were others, but that could have come later. And so now when I saw a lot of these names, I wanted to find out, well, what were they doing before the strike? Like, because a lot of these kids were like 12, 13 years old. What were they doing? They had to have their names in, because they were a scrappy bunch, you know? They were getting in shenanigans before. Well, this is something I don't remember learning in school, and it's a big thing. It's I would think, and we must have learned it, and I don't. It's one thing that escaped my brain. Well, as it turns out, in 1889, fires just swept the Pacific Northwest, Washington State in general. There was a great fire in 1889. Now, June 6th was the Seattle fire. In Spokane, there was it was August 4th in 1889, and then Ellensburg was the Independence Day. I've been to Ellensburg several times. They have a rodeo every year. I don't know if they still do. It'd be too bad if they quit doing that. My grandparents were regulars and we went all the time. I have great memories of going to the Ellensburg rodeo. But anyway, so there was this great fire and the pictures, this thing was wiped out. I mean, the city was just wiped out. Not just, and You know, in Newsies, where Jack is talking about this Ellis Island in flames. Uh, this is, yeah, it says because he uses the word conflagration. This is it. I mean, the pictures, it shows like this like structure, like a wall, and then like rubble everywhere. There's a panorama picture of looking out at the bay. This is before, of course, Pike's Place Market existed because that came in 1907. And like you have to consider that when I was living up there, of course, I was going to college at the time. So there's like Pike's Place and then like a parking garage and then uh, my college, which is probably office buildings if they kept it there now. But there's like a guy, I'll put it up here. So you see this gentleman sitting there, and there's just rubble everywhere. And you think that if Pike's Place had been there, it would have been just wiped out. I mean, this this fire just took out what was considered the business district of. Now, I've become very interested in learning more about the Great Fire of 1666, which was over in London. And um like that was not trying to compare at all because that took out all of London, most of London, I should say. But I mean, that was where my brain went, especially when you consider that there were two other fires that summer. It went June, July, August. It's like Washington didn't have a chance that year. But yeah, I'll put information in the description box for you to read more on that because I just don't remember learning about this. Now, the reason I bring this up is because um pretty much, I mean, there was so much destroyed in this fire. I mean, the few pictures that I'm sure showing later in editing, just what you know as Pioneer Square is that's the second Pioneer Square. And that's the reconstruction first. But it said that after Reconstruction, I mean, like the population, there was like a splurge of people that came. Not splurge, I don't think that's the right word, but so it's funny how that works. It's like you're reconstructing an area. People are like, oh, there was a great fire coming. It's perfectly safe now. But anyway, so there was a lot lost in the fire, including I found where it was the Seattle Post oh, what's the second word? Post Intelligencer, which is still in circulation. They're just online now. They're totally digital now. They're not printing anymore physical paper. But they're still going. But there's a picture of the workers in front of their building, and it's just rubble. And apparently they had a temporary facility and gone. So it's like spotty, the information that they have in those two areas. And so and that was the same thing. I've watched a few documentaries of the Great Fire of 1666, and when they're trying to find the death count for the Great Fire, um, it's that's in debate because the chroniclers, it was like the press has stopped. So, um, very interesting. But anyway, um, so pretty much I couldn't find a lot of information about these kids before. And this is one of the reasons why. This was 3 years before the strike. And they're pretty much still reconstructing. I mean, they were basically putting out what was important. And if the kids got in trouble in any way, shape, or form, yeah. If they were sent, if they were in prison in any way, then yeah. And so, which they did. Now, um, I'm going to be kind of winging it here. So just bear with me on this. Now, first of all, the Tacoma boys and the Seattle boys, it was it was like the Sharks and the Jets, like the West Side Story. They hated each other. It was like through the 1880s, the 1890s, and even in the Edwardian era, like half of the Edwardian era, they just were they they were in competition with each other nonstop. They really could not stand each other. But it was like right around 1910, then it was okay. They were starting to warm, especially since there was a ball, like a benefit that the Seattle kids were they put together, and the Tacoma boys had this Newsboy band that they had put together. Well, the Seattle kids needed entertainment, and so they had to rely on the Tacoma kids. It was a success, so that's all that matters. And I just found that really funny. I was reading through these newspapers, and it was like the Seattle and Tacoma kids just, it was just nonstop fighting with each other. They were in constant competition with each other, and then all of a sudden, it was almost like that benefit was the one that just smoothed everything over because even in the 20s, they were fine with each other. Oh, good heavens. Oh, now before I introduce you to this leader of the pack who is like a massive celebrity, everything, I do want to introduce you to their first tragedy. This this poor little guy. So this was a year after the union had formed. Now, I couldn't find a lot of information on the strike itself. Basically, the Post-Intelligencer, which is where I got a lot of my information, uh, focused more on Tacoma and the Oregonian. They didn't talk a lot about their own problem with these boys. Oh, good heavens. But now, before I talk about this poor little newsboy that I do want to talk about, I do want to mention that with the union, it was like the union formed and the newspaper expected them to represent it. It was like a business. You know, when you are hired on, it's you are part of the business. Now, I didn't see that so much over in like New York or any of the other places. It was kind of like, yeah, they're selling our newspapers and they're making money for us, but we don't really care, you know. And so I actually looked for pictures that Lewis Hine snapped here. I couldn't find any, which boggled my mind. I was like, why didn't he come up here? I mean, he went everywhere traveling for, so it didn't feel like child labor. So, um, and I think you'll get more of an understanding as we go further into this. And the reason that I bring up that they were seen as workers and you were expected to represent the the business, such as the Seattle Post-Intelligencer or whatever. The Seattle Post-Intelligencer was the main newspaper until the Seattle Star came, and I think the Seattle Star came at the turn of the century, which would be like 1900 or something. Yeah, because I didn't see it in the 1800s. But anyway, so there was this article that showed up that was at a regular meeting, one of the Newsboys unions, at the last evening, it was announced that Ross Armstrong and Ole Olson had failed to pay their dues and they were placed on the blacklist. So, whatever it was that they were expected to do, such as pay their dues, I don't know if they had done something and there was a fine that they had to pay or whatever, maybe they had ruffled up a cop or, like messed with a cop, or they had um shortchanged when they bought papers. Whatever they did not pay up. So now they're blacklisted. Okay. And it also says here, um, on the adjournment of the meeting, the officers came to the Post Intelligencer office accompanied by the whole union and presented formal requests that no papers be sold to the two delinquents. So they were shut out because it says here, newsboys shut out delinquents. This was a year after the union was formed. Okay, so these kids are already organized, like organized. They have their officers and they're setting up stuff like this. If you don't follow the rules, you're going to get blacklisted. So Ross and Ole then they decided to not follow the rules, and this is what happened. Now they don't have what they need to make money, and so that that was one thing that really opened my eyes on it because again, I've always known what I saw with the New York kids, where it was like they basically, like Pulitzer and Hearst basically ignore the kids, which was very obvious because then the kids rose up against them. And I talked about it in the strike of 1899, where there were strikes that went on like in Brooklyn and Boston and all of that, and the businesses basically ignored them. It was like, yeah, we get it, you're making money for us, but we can raise the price because it's our business. We can do what we want. But with this, it's run so different. Again, this is out west. It's like and so the idea that the kids were seen basically as equals, it's like, okay, so they're another branch of the office. And that the Post Intelligencer, the newspaper, complied with them and were constantly updating everybody on how the union was going because there were several articles talking about the union officer updates and the union officer meetings and that I mean it continued into the teen, like in 1912, 19, I think the last one I saw was before the war, before World War One. And I didn't see very many in the 20s, but that doesn't mean anything. I'm still trying to push through the 20s. That's something to understand is that going through all of this, starting out, you see the Lizzie Borden trial, and then you see the first Mary Pickford divorce trial. That's how far of a stretch I've gone so far. And I'm thinking about going through the 30s. I'm not sure if I want to. I might. I mean, this is just so interesting to me. Okay, because this is my neck of the woods. I want to know more about these kiddos. Anyway, so their first tragedy, this was in 1893. again, this is the year, the same time that they decide to blacklist those kids. So Cecil Higginbotham. All right. Now he has a brother and he does show up and it'll say, let's see, I want to make sure I get the right one. So September 30th, 1893, there's this article. Come up, please. Okay, so the article reads Death Among the Newsboys. Heart disease carries off Cecil Higginbotham, and they're making funeral arrangements. So he succumbed to heart disease. He was 12 years old, and he was the brother of Arthur Higginbotham. Now, Arthur is the one that takes over for his brother. I remember seeing another name with the last name Higginbotham. I'm not sure if he could be a brother, he could be related, it might not be related at all. But Arthur took over and I saw his name for quite a stretch of time. So this was in 1893. I believe the last time I see him was 1899. Um, and Cecil was the Secretary of the Union. So let's see, it formed in November and this is September. So not quite a year. So he had been, the boy was well known to the public. He had sold for the Post Intelligencer at his usual place of business, and that's perfect wording, usual place of business. So he was seen as a little businessman. All of these kids were seen as businessmen for the Seattle newspaper. Okay, again, not like in New York. I mean, when I would see how they were treated by the new here over here, it was a complete eye opener for me. You know, I talked about Mother Jones. I need to redo my video on Lewis Hine, but a lot of people know how Lewis Hine used his camera to protest child labor and show how these kids are we don't need child labor. And he continued to shove it into Congress's face uh how everybody's on the backs of these kids and yeah. So anyway, so it shows that he was on where he sold. Uh, he had sold there for the last 3 years. So if this is, yeah, it was the year after the fire. Because this is 93 and the strike was 92. So yeah, I think my math is right on that. It isn't always. Uh, for the last 3 years, never missed a morning. And just before his death, he told his brother he wanted to get well so that he could sell papers again. Oh, that's so sad. Oh. He was a favorite among the newsboys, and they visited him during his illness and often took him flowers, fruit, and delicacies. He was a regular attendant at the Denny School, so he was getting an education. And that was another thing. A lot of these kids, there were a lot of the newsies, like who I would colorize, and some of them would sell before school. So they were getting up at like 3 or 4 in the morning so they could sell and then go to school. And they would sometimes sell after school, but not all of them had an education. Almost every one of these kids had an education and they had a family and everything, but they still like to be rambunctious kids. And it says that when the funeral took place. Now, um, the funeral took place at the beginning of October. This is the thing. This is for a 12-year-old little newsboy. Now you think about this. Over in New York or in the East Coast or a lot of these other kids, when they would pass away, it was like they were just street trash. Okay, here's Cecil. He passes away. He's got these articles about him because he was a newspaper businessman. All right. Um, so it talks about how his funeral, there was a large gathering, the Newsboys Union to the number of 60 attending. Uh, Now, it talks about how there were large funeral arrangements, huge funeral arrangements. There were wreaths, bouquets, cut flowers, and they put there was a funeral piece that was in that said like the number 9. That was like his funeral badge. And so I mean, not his funeral badge, his union badge. They all had union badges and they had number on it. And that was presented by the union. And so his number was 9. And putting out all the stuff, they set that up. Now you think about it. In a year's time, they were able to come up with the money to set up this funeral arrangement. That's impressive. These scrappy little kids came up for their comrade, their fellow newsboy. Okay, so many people came to attend the service that the boys gave up their seats in the chapel. Does it say how many? It didn't say how many were in the church, but um, the pallbearers, John Leckie, Leckie gets in trouble later, Henry Collins, and followed by other newsboys, each of whom carried a newspaper under his arm, which is very symbolic. Um, so that was the first tragedy that these boys dealt with was Cecil. And of course Arthur took over. I could have sworn he had another brother, but it could be that was another relative. And I could be way off too. Now, Henry Collins, okay, Henry Collins is he becomes the leader of the pack. Henry is okay over in New York. I know the movie says that it's Jack Kelly. I don't know why they decided to do that, but the actual leader of the Newsboys in the strike of 1899 is Kid Blink. And so for here in Seattle, it's Henry Collins. And the funniest part about it is when I first eh, the first article that I found about him, he was actually living in, I believe, Walla Walla. And let's see, let's find that article. Um, yeah, there it is. Because he wasn't living in Seattle yet. And then he and his family moved. I'm wondering if this was such a problem. He was such a problem where they were living that they had to move away. I wouldn't be surprised. So it's a newsboy's son wealth. This was in 1892, January 31st, 1892. And this woman of Tacoma, so it was either Tacoma, maybe it was Walla Walla Street. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, we have cities that are called Brooklyn and that kind of thing over here. But anyway, so this woman of Tacoma lost her purse that contained $52 and it was recovered, but not before this little newsboy and his buddy spent a whole bunch of it. Okay, so Henry Collins found this purse. So he lives with his parents. Okay, and they bought a whole bunch of stuff. Now you have to consider this is 1892. This purse had $52. Now listen to how much they bought. He bought a gun, which I'm thinking it was like a cap gun kind of a thing, not an actual, yeah. even for back then, I don't see how a little boy could buy just a gun, just go in and buy a gun. But uh, he bought a gun, went to a bazaar and bought a banjo, two watches with brass chains, and they went to the bakery and bought half a dozen custard pies and $1 worth of cookies. Wonder how many that was for the time. They ate until they could not hold any more, then threw the remainder of the pie and cookie away. Ugh. I can remember when I was a kid and I was a I say on this channel I was a chunky kid and back then it was like I thought I could eat my heart's content in sugary substances, right? Nowadays it's like I'll probably eat one sugary thing a day, probably in 2 days. Pies and cookies are not as delectable as they were when I was little. So Henry goes home to his mom. He's got this banjo and his gun and, the watch. And oh, I guess his friend took the gun. And he's home. He actually went before he went home, he went to the butcher shop, it says, and paid his mother's bill, meat and grocery bill. Then when he went home, she's like, what is all this? Uh, well, I bought them. And but with what money? And he's I'm rich. And so they finally fixed everything, got the money back to because they put in the newspaper that they found this purse and everything. They were able to work everything out. But that was the introduction of little Henry Collins. He's later known as Henry Trilby Collins. Trilby is a type of hat, and I'm guessing that that was the kind of hat that he had. And but of course, the Intelligencer, the Seattle newspaper, uh, would show up at these like they had a Labor Day events and um they had special like Christmas things and just fun little celebrations and festivals and of course a lot of the different unions would show up as well and they would have and the Newsboy Union was expected to show up and represent the newspaper. Again, this is eye-opening because at with over can you imagine Pulitzer and Hearst doing this with the news with Kid Blink and his bunch of kids? Never heard of it. Never heard of it. So there's there are instances of like there's a sailors union. There are several. Oh gosh, what were some of the unions? I have one of those here. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Where's the sports? Sports. Um, yeah, because there's like stage employee union, there's a sailors union. I mentioned that tailors union. That one's pretty obvious. A typographical union, a plumbers union, another one that's obvious. Horseshoers union, cigar maker union, iron molders union. Um, printing pressman union, bricklayer union. I mean, all these different unions that are here. And during these events, they would go up against the Newsboys. There was one with the Sailor Union running a marathon with the Newsboy. Oh, and the whole time I was reading it, it was like a 1930s radio guy. It was, and I'm thinking, oh, what fun. Oh, if let's go back to stuff like that, you know? Or just these fun little festivals and everything, instead of being plugged in all the time. And they had where, oh, is this the one that I have up right now where it was because there was another one where I believe maybe it's this one where the marathon, the boys went up against the girls, and I believe it was uh yeah, the Newsboys were there in full force. Krabby Burke, who we've uh oh, I found his follow-up story. Hogan Dally Kid and other well-known members of the union did their best to make the day long, well remembered. The girls up there must be born sprinters. Uh, they simply took everything in sight. So they won. I mean, they annihilated the boys. And the girls in this one, I believe, were part of like the tailor union and the dressmaker union. And so, yeah, and Hogan Alley Kid is quite a tough guy. So to have his butt kicked by a girl. And but that one is 100-yard dash. And for kids under 12 to go on 100-yard dash, Hogan Alley Kid and then one of the other girls. And he didn't, I mean, he did okay, but it's just, oh man. So, but let's talk about Krabby. Okay, because I talked about it in that video. I had found Krabby. His real name is John. And for those of you that um, didn't see that video, so Krabby Burke, uh, he lived in a lodging house, and from the sound of it, so did his sisters. Now, his sisters, I got this from the follow-up article that I found. His sisters are well known in the community, have a high standing in the community. So what he did, but his real name is John Burke. Now, the owner of the lodging house um, that is on 4th Avenue between Pike and Pine, which I know that area very well. I would pass by there all the time. I was really excited. I was like, I know where that is. So for those of you that live in Seattle, there was a lodging house there. So Mrs. Pomeroy, her sister, came to visit and brought her daughter Myrtle. Okay. And the newsboys who live there, all of a sudden they dropped their uh frayed clothes, their scrappy clothes, and started dressing nice. And they would start looking nice and everything for young Myrtle. Krabby took it a bit too far. I mean, yeah, all of them were trying to romance Myrtle, but his romancing went to the point of they eloped. Not only did they elope, they skipped town. And Mama Bear was not happy. She the first article, which when was that? August 11th, 1898, talked about how she was on the warpath. She was going to find these two, and she had death in her eyes. Now, the other news, there were like three other newsboys who knew about the elopement, and they were like, I'm not a snitcher. I'm not going to tell you anything. Okay. Um, so Krabby had been smart not to tell a lot of people about what had happened. So there is a follow-up. Okay. And the follow-up reads as suspended honeymoon. Mr. and Mrs. Burke located in Renton Hotel. I've been to Renton a few times. The bride of 2 days is brought home by her mother. Will try to annul the marriage with young newsboy. Will she or will she not? Now, I feel bad for both of these kids. Okay, I feel bad for Myrtle because I bet with as angry as her mother is, wagging her finger, what do you think you've done? What about this? Blah, 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 blah. Poor Myrtle. I mean, all of a sudden, the guilt is setting in so hard that she's probably a puddle on the floor just crying. Like, I'm sorry, I didn't know, I'm just sorry. And um, and then of course there's uh John Burke, who he it talks about in the article where he's upset because he's just sure that she's gonna leave with where Myrtle's just gonna leave with the mom and not take into consideration the feelings that yeah, I mean that is I thought we had something and and now I said before that I saw where he was 21. No, he is 18. The daughter, the sister confirmed that. And so he is in fact 18. Um so 18 and Myrtle is 16. So they're both underage, but still. I mean, who knows what was considered adult back then? You do have to take that in consideration as well. Because I mean, we can be like, "Oh my gosh," but let's just uh yeah, we do have to think about that and take a step back. Ooh. And, but the sister is on the side of the mother-in-law and says they are but children. This is one sister. He has two. And John is only 18 years of age, a mere child. And so it was considered they're not adult. 18 was not considered an adult yet. And the girl he married is just 16. I can hardly understand my brother doing such a foolish thing. Will surely advise him to consent to a divorce or such other proceedings. So she, as nice as she can, she's saying, maybe next time he'll think with the right head. And poor guy. He just and but I do feel bad for both of them. I mean, they got swept up in the moment, and so you can't fault them for that. It does happen. And I do this is one of those instances where I feel bad for him also because of the fact that his sisters are in high standing in society, and it's like because of his actions, it what he does makes them look bad. I hate that. I absolutely hate that. So I feel bad for him there too, because now she's saying, well, they're just children and it's just this and it's just that. And I'll talk to him. I'll talk to him and we'll work on that. And it's just like, right, like you've never done something stupid. Okay. Just because you're at high standing in the society, okay. So yeah, when I saw this, I was like, oh, these poor kids. Yeah, I wonder if it sounds like Myrtle went ahead I mean from the sound of it, the separation was pretty much decided. The divorce was pretty much decided. The two of them did not have a say in it. And 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 she left. I feel bad for both of them. And because the adults in the situation were not going to let them have a say at all. And that kind of frustrates me. I mean, I wasn't there. I c- I can't say either way, but it is, you know, what would have happened if they hadn't been found, you know? And like I said, this was what, again, 1898. You see him show up every once in a while. He was more in the spotlight. You saw him uh show up more and more, like with the festivals and everything. He was doing the marathons and all that. But after this, he you would see his name every once in a while, but it was mainly to say that he was there at the meetings and all that. This just took the wind out of his sails. He was a broken kid after this, and so first love, man, it was very gut-wrenching. Um, so now another thing that is similar, and I saw this quite a bit, was there were a lot of kids that were so out of control that they were sent to what was known as reform school. Now, if you've seen the movie, there was what was known as the refuge. Okay, these kids were sent to rehab, as it was explained in the movie. They were sent to the refuge so that they could be rehabilitated. And that's pretty much what was going on here. They were sent to reform school, and they would actually send letters to the judge to tell him how they're doing in reform school. And they were printed in the paper as to how they're doing. There was one kid in particular, this Frank Fagan. He never learned his lesson. Frank Fagan, uh, this is 1896, and Frank Fagan in July 2nd, no, February 6th, I'm sorry. So in February, he was found um, breaking into steamers at the dock, and he would go into the dock and he would steal items out of steamers. And the cops were trying to find him, but it was like he would lie so much. His stories were all over the place that the cops were just having a hell of a time trying to find him and find out who did this. So it was like there would be someone like a sailor walking around on the dock and be like, "What are you doing here? You don't have access here." And then the kid would say this random story, and so to get himself out of the situation, and it just continued to spiral like that. And well, he was finally caught, and so July they printed a letter from reform school by Frank, and Frank basically was like, "So when can I go home? I'm writing a letter because I was told I had to. When can I go home?" So he really wasn't learning anything. And in December of 1896, it was the same thing. It was basically like, dude, I just want to go home. And the last time I see Frank is in 1908, and he's put in prison. He's got like several aliases, and it's for burglary. He didn't learn anything, and sometimes unfortunately that happens. He went from being this scrappy little newsboy stealing off of steamers. He was found in a saloon stealing money and gin. Oh, because you think about, I think in 1896 he was 12, and so in 1908, yeah, do the math on that. And there was this other kid. This one was heartbreaking. I think this, I think it's Harold. Um, yeah, Harold Hubbard in 1899. So June 18th of 1899, this little kid, Harold, he was a constant runaway. Harold Hubbard comes very near to being the champion runaway child of Seattle, although Richard Swanson held that title for a long time. So Harold's grandfather has given up the idea of controlling him and applied to the attorney, a prosecuting attorney, to have him sent to reform school. So the grandfather has tried everything. And this kid is just he's constantly running away, will not listen or anything like that. But here's the heartbreaking part. Hubbard is only 8 years old at this time. In 1899, he was only 8 years old. He could take care of himself with all the assurance of regular members of the Newsboy Union. So the union knew that he was a constant runaway. Again, these are scrappy kids, bunch of scrappers, bunch of fighters, and all of that. He has been found several times on steamers bound for different points around the Puget Sound. On one occasion, he was found asleep under a seat on the Third Avenue Theater, having disappeared from his house a day or so previously. His parents are not living together. His father is in Alaska. Okay. Now, fast forward to June 20th, 2 days later, and it says that a petition was filed to the Superior Court. Uh, the grandfather was asking that his grandson, Harold Hubbard, 8 years of age, be committed to the reform school as an incorrigible, which is basically fancy talk for he's out of control. He says that the boy's parents do not live in the city and that he finds it impossible to keep the youth at home and out of bad habits. So the dad is in Alaska. The mom, where is she? I feel so bad for this grandpa. He's trying everything to help his grandson, 8 years old. And this is and obviously the grandpa sees this as a cry for help. So I'm on the side of the grandpa on this one. Um, in addition to that, he says that the boy is becoming addicted to the crime of theft. Well, yeah, because he's going on these steamers and he's found in theaters and everything. Yeah. He granted okay, so the judge granted the order and sent the youth Harold to the reform school until he shall be 18 years old, unless sooner discharged or paroled. The boy is a bright-looking little fellow and appears younger than he is. His father is said to be in Alaska and his mother in Roslyn. He has already had experience with the police and has been in their hands several days. Think about that. 8 years old and you've already had scraps with the police. And so the parents are not in town. The grandpa's doing everything he can. This kid and your friends are basically like, "Oh, he's fine." And he'll be okay. And so they are organized and at the same time they're not. Because they are all friends. That's the one downside when you're all a group, a collective, like a clique, so to speak. I don't like using that word, but um and but on the topic, because I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to get too long into this, but on the subject of them being organized, this is the thing, is that they um set up money. They organized money. There was let's see if I can find it. There was like a small little blurb about how uh Seattle was raising money for a canal. And the Newsboy Union gave money for that, like a big chunk of money. Around Christmas time, there was a cry for money, excuse me, for so that they could give toys for the orphans. And the Newsies gave to that. And so it wasn't just that. I mean, they had dances, they also, yeah, this is another thing and then I'll close up because again, there's so much with this. I would love to introduce more newsies, but I don't want to. They uh they gave stage plays. It wasn't so much because I know I talked about in the Newsy strike of 1899 that the Newsies were given it was like this charity thing where Newsies were given seats in a uh, uh, a theater so that they could watch a play or even a silent film. I saw that a few times, and yeah, in the 20s, and the Newsies got to see a Douglas Fairbanks. Uh, I don't remember which one it was, but they got to see a Douglas Fairbanks silent film. But no, these uh, Newsies were putting together plays. In fact, uh, Henry Collins, um, before he left for Alaska, I think I cut myself off talking about Henry Collins, but he was known as the champion pie eater. Okay, and people would actually, whenever there was like the Labor Day thing or the summer festival or whatever, and they had the pie eating contest, everybody had to see him eat this do the pie eating contest because he ate in like 40 seconds. I mean, he was a champion pie eater. And so Seattle had pie eater. Okay. He wasn't in New York. He was in Seattle. We claim pie eater. I will fight you on that because there is evidence of pie eater, and his name is Henry Trilby Collins. The fact that I came across so many articles talking about his pie eating skill. It was legend around here. And but there was one article in particular talking about how they were going to put on a stage play. It was for a benefit. They were going to do the stage play, and then it was going to be the last time that Henry Collins was going to do a pie eating contest before he left for Alaska because he decided he was going to retire as a newsboy and go up and be part of the Alaskan gold rush of the 1890s. I believe he left in 96 or 97. And there were several of those newsies that left to try their hand in the gold rush of the 1890s. And from what I was gathering, from what it sounded like, is that he actually helped the newspapers branch out up there. And because he was coming back quite a bit, they kept referencing him. And I thought, okay, so they're like massive fanboys for this guy. It's a little weird. No, actually, what they were talking about was that he was taking stacks of newspapers over there as to branch out the new it didn't work but it was a trial and error kind of a thing but he helped in trying that at least, and it was a thing that just didn't work, unfortunately. So yeah, he was coming back into Seattle, getting stacks of these newspapers for the Seattle Post and taking them back. And yeah, so he was coming back quite a bit. And apparently he had another business idea and that fell apart. So by the turn of the century, by like 1900, 1901, I didn't see his name anymore. You know, he was this big celebrity. He went from being a little purse stealer to pie eating champion of Seattle to uh trying his hand at gold mining to who knows where he went, you know? But, but anyway, yeah, in closing, I am still sifting through a lot of information on these newsies. So there will be a part two. There'll probably be a part three. I might go through the 30s. Who knows? I'm not sure. I haven't found a stopping point of when the Newsboy Union crumbled. It did at some point, obviously, but I haven't found where they stopped talking about it. But um, I'll try to find it and everything. But anyway, I'll put all that information in the description box for you, and I'll close up here.